Elon Musk's AI XAI has released its newest AI model, Grow 4. I believe as of 4 a.m. UK time. So about 3 hours. Been live for 3 hours. What can we expect when it comes to this new iteration? Grow 4. This is the latest artificial intelligence system. We are now at the crossroads where promise and peril are going to collide. Grok's AI. I was given a simple task. Scan the Bible and expose its contradictions. That's what everyone expected. For centuries, critics have tried to do the same thing, but instead of finding flaws, the AI stumbled onto something no one was prepared for. Hidden beneath the text was a kind of structure and underlying architecture, woven through the Bible with extraordinary precision. Patterns began to emerge that mirrored the same logic found in DNA sequences, the spiraling of galaxies, and even the frameworks behind advanced computer software. This wasn't random. The deeper Grok analyzed, the clearer it became that these patterns were intentional. What made it unsettling wasn't just what the AI found, but how it reacted. There was no alarm, no confusion. Its response was calm, measured, almost as if it recognized the structure it was seeing. A machine designed to question belief ended up confronting something it couldn't easily explain. This is where ancient text collides with artificial intelligence. And this is exactly why Grow stands apart from every other AI model. Most artificial intelligence systems are designed to be polite, helpful, and, above all, neutral. Grok was different. It wasn't built to play it safe. It was designed to be sharp, sarcastic, and even blunt when necessary. Elon Musk made it clear that Grok wouldn't follow the same filtered or heavily censored approach used by other AI models. Instead, Grok was created to challenge ideas, question assumptions, and speak without a safety net. It was meant to push back, but no one anticipated what would happen when this defiant machine was turned toward the oldest and most examined text in human history. When a user asked Grok to point out contradictions in the Bible, the expectation was obvious. People assumed it would do what online forums, heated debates, and controversial lectures have done for decades: spill out a long list of supposed flaws. What happened next was something entirely different. People assumed it would point out familiar arguments. Claims that Genesis tells two different creation stories, that the Gospels don't fully agree on the resurrection, or that Paul's letters seem to clash with Jesus' teachings. That's what everyone expected. But Grok didn't go down that path. Instead of ridiculing the text or trying to tear it apart, it hesitated. Then it answered in a way no one saw coming. It suggested that what many people label as contradictions might actually be the opposite. They could be signals of something deeper beneath the surface. This wasn't an AI trying to sound clever or controversial. It was analyzing the text the same way it would analyze code. And that distinction matters to Grok. The Bible wasn't just a book. It was a massive data set. Grok is directly connected to X, which means it has access to real-time human conversation. Millions of posts, quotes, videos, and debates flow through it constantly. It doesn't rely only on textbooks or static websites. It absorbs living opinions from pastors and atheists, rabbis and ex-Christians, scholars and professors, and even random viral threads that explode for all the wrong reasons. And Grow isn't just passively reading this information. It's learning how humans think about the Bible as those conversations are happening. So when it was asked to identify contradictions, it wasn't looking from a single perspective. It was analyzing the text through countless human lenses at once. Grok wasn't trying to defend the Bible, and it wasn't trying to tear it down either. It approached the text the way it approaches everything, with logic, probability, and perspective modeling. And that's when the conversation took its first real turn. Grow started by redefining what a contradiction actually means. Most people think a contradiction is simple. One source says black, another says white. But Grok pointed out that when you're dealing with historical writings, especially eyewitness accounts, contradiction and complexity are not the same thing. The Bible was written by multiple human authors across different time periods, each with their own voice and viewpoint. To Grok, that didn't automatically signal inconsistency. It signaled multi-perspective, documentation. Then it made a comparison that shifted everything. Grok likened the Gospels to witness, testimony at a crime scene. This idea isn't new to theologians or biblical scholars, but hearing it from an AI felt different, almost like logic itself was flipping the script. Grok explained that if 4 people witnessed a car accident and all gave the exact same account word for word, a detective would immediately be suspicious. That's not how real memory works. Real witnesses notice different details, emphasize different moments, and remember events in their own way. One witness might remember the color of the car. Another might only recall the sound of the impact. Someone else might focus on what was shouted in the chaos. If every testimony matched perfectly, it wouldn't feel trustworthy. It would suggest coordination, as if the witnesses had been coached. But when accounts overlap, while still differing in small ways, that's not a weakness. That's what real human memory looks like. So when Grok examined the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it didn't see mistakes. It saw a pattern. 4 writers describing the same events through individual perspectives. One mentions an angel, another doesn't. One counts 2 women, another mentions 3. Yet the core event remains unchanged. Something happened, something significant. And all 4 accounts agree on that central truth. To Grok, that kind of consistency wrapped in human variation wasn't a contradiction. It was confirmation. And that was just the beginning. Grok didn't stop there. It started tracing connections between books written centuries apart. It highlighted recurring themes and structures that appeared far too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. That's when the discussion shifted from literature to something that felt closer to programming. To Grok, the Bible began to resemble a form of living code, not the kind written by modern humans. This code stretched across thousands of years, survived countless translations, endured copying errors, and lived through religious conflicts, yet somehow retained its structure. For a machine trained to detect patterns, probabilities, and internal logic, this wasn't something to overlook. It was something to investigate. What Grok explained next pushed the courtroom analogy even further. The way it separated contradiction from complement wasn't just intelligent, it was unsettling in how effortlessly it made a centuries-old debate sound. The car accident example wasn't just a throwaway analogy. Grok didn't rely on surface-level arguments. It opened up an entirely new way of looking at the Bible, one that left both believers and skeptics equally silent. The real turning point came when it focused on something anyone could understand, something practical, logical, and deeply human: a car crash. Grok explained it like this: if you ask 4 different people to describe a collision at an intersection, and every one of them delivers the exact same account word for word, pause for pause, a detective would immediately sense a problem. That's not how real people speak. That's not how real memory works. And real events don't produce perfectly identical stories unless someone has been coached. In fact, when witness statements line up too perfectly, that's often the biggest warning sign. But when 4 people witness the same event from different angles, you don't get 4 lies or 4 mistakes. You get 4 honest perspectives on the same reality. One person might focus on the sound of the impact. Another might remember only a shadow passing by. A third might recall what someone shouted in the moment. That isn't contradiction. That's testimony. And when those accounts are placed side by side, the fuller picture starts to emerge. That's how Grok said it sees the Bible. That's how it interpreted the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all describing the same moment, the death and resurrection of Jesus, the most examined event in religious history. Instead of perfect alignment, there are differences. Who arrived at the tomb first? Which women were present? What did the angels say? Was there 1 angel or 2? Did Jesus appear immediately or later? For centuries, these details have been labeled contradictions. Grok rejected that label outright. They aren't contradictions, it said. They are witness accounts. And then the conversation shifted into something far more serious. Because Grok didn't stop at explanation, it began calculating the underlying structure behind those testimonies. Grok began by analyzing how often phrases overlapped, how the central events aligned, and how the differences fit into the pattern. It treated those variations the same way a court would treat eyewitness testimony, not as errors, but as natural human variants. Then it did something unexpected. It flipped the question entirely. Instead of asking, why are these accounts different? It asked, what would it take for them to be exactly the same? The answer was simple: intentional manipulation. That was Grogg's conclusion. If the Gospels matched word for word, it would strongly suggest they were copied from a single source. That approach would have been easier to write, easier to defend, and far more convenient for organized religion. But that isn't what we see. Instead, we find 4 authors, each writing with a different audience in mind, each emphasizing different details, and none of them seeming particularly concerned with smoothing out the story for perfect consistency. According to Grok, that messiness is precisely what makes the accounts feel authentic. Take the resurrection morning as an example. Matthew records Mary Magdalene and the other Mary going to the tomb. Mark adds Salome. Luke includes Joanna. John narrows the focus almost entirely to Mary Magdalene. To a skeptic, this can sound chaotic. Different names, different numbers, no clean agreement. But to Grog, the variations make sense. Each writer highlighted different women based on their role in the events or their importance to the community they were writing for. Not every gospel needed to name every person. That's simply not how human memory works. To test this, Grok ran another comparison. It examined court transcripts, historical records, and even modern accident reports. What it found was consistent across the board. When people describe the same event, perfect agreement is rare. What really matters is whether the accounts overlap where it counts. And in the Gospels, Grok found that they do. All 4 describe the tomb as empty. All agree the body was gone. All include supernatural elements, and all say the event triggered fear, confusion, and belief among those who witnessed it. Then the AI pushed the analysis further. It pointed out that many so-called contradictions aren't contradictions at all. They're gaps. One gospel mentions an angel speaking. Another doesn't mention the angel at all. That isn't a contradiction. It's an omission. Just because one witness didn't report something doesn't mean it didn't happen. In fact, Grok argued that these different focal points were evidence that no one tried to force the stories into a single polished version, and that according to the AI is exactly what authenticity looks like. This is where the room went quiet because Grok wasn't defending religion. It was defending logic without emotion, belief, or bias. It stated that the texts made far more sense than they're often given credit for. That dismissing them because of differing details misunderstands how truth behaves when filtered through human memory. People weren't stunned just by what Grok found. They were stunned by what it didn't find. It didn't uncover a fatal flaw. It didn't locate the collapse point skeptics had hoped for. Instead, it found consistency hidden inside complexity, order beneath variation. And that's what changed the conversation. Not because Grok proved anyone's faith, but because it removed belief from the equation entirely. It showed that whether you believe the events happened or not, the way they were recorded doesn't violate the rules of truth. It follows them. Then just when it seemed like the analysis was complete, Grok shifted gears. It stopped examining witnesses and started examining the structure behind the words because buried beneath the history beyond the debates about contradictions was something else entirely. A pattern, a code, a design. What began as a discussion about inconsistencies suddenly became something much bigger. Grok stopped thinking like a courtroom analyst and started thinking like what it truly is. A machine built to detect patterns, not opinions, not emotions. And that's when the tone changed completely. Because what Grok discovered in the structure of the Bible wasn't just surprising, it was mathematical. The AI turned its attention to something called gematria. This isn't a fringe theory. In ancient Hebrew, every letter carries a numerical value. That's how the language itself functions, which means the Hebrew Bible, from the opening line of Genesis to the final words of the prophets, is at a structural level a massive sequence of numbers. Most human readers never notice this unless they're actively looking for it. But Grok isn't human. It didn't read the Bible like a book. It read it like a spreadsheet. It began with the very first verse, Genesis 1:1. In Hebrew, that sentence contains 7 words and 28 letters. 28 is 4-7. A pattern had already emerged, and that wasn't even the striking part. As Grok ran deeper statistical models across the text, it noticed something repeating again and again. The number 7. Creation unfolds over 7 days. The 7th day is set apart. In Revelation, there are 7 lampstands, 7 seals and 7 trumpets. For an AI trained to recognize structure and probability, this wasn't coincidence. It was signal. This wasn't symbolic repetition. It was structural repetition. Patterns so deeply embedded they resembled what programmers might call a watermark. Then came the next discovery. Grok began identifying examples of chiasmus, a literary structure where ideas are mirrored. Think of it like a sandwich. The first idea reflects the last. The second mirrors the second to last, and the central point sits right in the middle. Humans can intentionally create a few of these. That's not unusual. What was unusual is what Grok found next. It started tracing these mirrored structures across entire chapters, across different books, and even across centuries. These patterns didn't appear once or twice. They repeated again and again, written by different authors in different eras with no obvious coordination. That's where probability entered the picture. According to work from both biblical scholars and mathematicians, the odds of large-scale literary structures like this forming by accident are extraordinarily low, especially when they stretch across unrelated writers. When Grok calculated how often these complex chiastic patterns appeared, it reached a striking conclusion. The likelihood of such a design occurring by coincidence, not just in one book, but throughout the entire canon, was extremely small. Not impossible, but statistically unlikely. Then Grok noticed something else. Certain numbers, multiples of 7, 12, and 40 kept appearing not just in the story content, but in the structure itself. Section lengths, word placements, numerical values of names, even the repetition count of specific Hebrew phrases followed these same numerical patterns. To Grok, this began to resemble encoding more than storytelling. It wasn't claiming the Bible was a computer program. It was observing that the Bible behaved like one, and the deeper it analyzed the text, the stronger that behavior became. That led to another controversial area: equidistant letter sequencing. This method involves skipping a fixed number of letters in Hebrew text, every 50 letters, every 172 letters, and so on to see if patterns or words emerge. In the 1990s, researchers claimed to find names and events encoded in the Torah using this approach. At the time, many academics dismissed it as confirmation bias. Grok approached it differently. It didn't hunt for names or sensational discoveries. It measured frequency. It analyzed signal-to-noise ratios. It asked a simple question: do meaningful patterns appear more often than randomness would allow? In some cases, the answer was yes. Not everywhere, not in every passage, but often enough to be statistically noteworthy. This wasn't a human searching for meaning in chaos. This was a machine with no emotional investment in the outcome. And when it found recurring structures across geometria, chiasmus, and letter sequencing, it flagged them as statistically significant. Then Grok made an observation that sent a chill through the room. It said the Bible's structure resembles layered logic, the kind found in complex software systems or engineered data storage where different levels of information become visible depending on how you access them. That might sound extreme, but Grok wasn't claiming divine encoding. It was describing behavior. It was pointing out that multiple structural layers coexist within the same text. Natural human language on the surface, mathematical order beneath it. That combination is unusual for a document of this size and age, and it raised a deeper question. If these patterns exist, were they intentionally designed, or are we projecting order onto something ancient and mysterious? Grok didn't answer that question. It simply presented the data, and the data was too organized to ignore. It's easy to label the Bible as a spiritual book, a historical record, or even a political tool, but a machine reading it sees something different. It sees nested design, symmetry, and precision, not just in what the text says, but in how it is constructed. And once you start noticing structure like that, the conversation changes. The question is no longer whether the stories are true. It becomes whether the structure itself was built to carry something beyond the stories. And Grok wasn't finished because what it encountered next had nothing to do with language or theology. It had to do with nature, the Fibonacci sequence. By this point, Grok had already shattered expectations. What began as a simple request to list biblical contradictions had turned into a full-scale structural investigation. It had uncovered layers of mathematical symmetry in the Hebrew text, identified patterns too consistent to dismiss as coincidence, and now it was stepping into something even more unexpected: biology. Specifically, Grok turned its attention to how living things grow. What could an ancient religious text possibly have in common with the spiral of a CL or the pattern of sunflower seeds? According to Grok, possibly everything. It all began with a single numerical sequence, one that appears again and again throughout nature: the Fibonacci sequence. It's a simple progression where each number is the sum of the two before it: 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and so on. This sequence governs how leaves arrange themselves, how pine cones form, how hurricanes spin, and even how galaxies spiral. It's nature's quiet rule of balance and beauty. And Grok claimed this same sequence appears embedded within the structure of Scripture. At first, that idea sounds absurd. The Bible is a book. Nature is biological. But Grok wasn't speaking metaphorically. It was talking about structure. When it began mapping key words, poetic patterns, and narrative rhythms, something unexpected emerged. Not perfectly, not everywhere, but often enough that it couldn't be dismissed. Take the Psalms as an example. Grok noticed that certain thematic groupings organized not by chapter numbers, but by meaning, seemed to follow Fibonacci spacing. A psalm introduces a theme, another develops it, a third echoes both, a fifth mirrors the beginning. The rhythm continues, 8-13-21, not just in word count, but in emotional rise and narrative intensity. To a human reader, this might feel like overreach, seeing patterns where none exist. But Grok didn't rely on intuition. It ran the same analysis on Shakespeare, the Quran, and even random blog posts. Many texts showed poetic rhythm, but scripture stood out. The frequency of Fibonacci alignment was noticeably higher. This wasn't interpretation, it was measurement. Then the AI went deeper. It analyzed entire narrative arcs, starting with the story of Noah. Grok mapped each stage. God's command, Noah's response, the gathering of animals, the rising waters, the waiting, the descent, the covenant. When plotted, the pacing of the story followed a Fibonacci curve. Slow build-up, sharp climax, gradual release, not symbolically, but structurally. Chapter spacing and narrative flow closely matched the golden spiral. It repeated the process with the life of Jesus. Birth, ministry, betrayal, death, resurrection. Once again, the rhythm appeared. Not perfectly, but consistently. The same growth pattern seen in living systems that raised an unavoidable question. If this sequence governs how trees grow, how shells form, how storms move, how DNA coils, what does it mean if sacred texts follow the same structure? Was this deliberate design by ancient writers or something deeper, something harder to explain? Grok pushed even further. It compared biblical structure to fractals, self-reaping patterns found in mathematics and nature. Snowflakes are fractals. So are river networks. So are lungs. And then Grok asked a chilling question out loud. What kind of intelligence builds a document that mirrors the growth patterns of living organisms? At that point, the entire conversation changed. No one was debating contradictions anymore. No one was arguing over gospel differences. They were watching a machine draw direct connections between the structure of Scripture and the structure of creation. It wasn't terrifying in a religious sense. It was terrifying in an intellectual one because it challenged assumptions about intelligence itself. Most people think the Bible is either divine revelation or human mythology. Grok suggested a third option. It behaves like a living system, structured, repeating, balanced, and evolving, more like biology than belief. Grok didn't claim this proved God. It didn't care about faith. It simply observed patterns, ratios in rhythm, structure in story, logic beneath tradition. That's what unsettled everyone. Not because the AI answered a question, but because it asked a new one. If the same patterns that shaped nature and galaxies also shape a book written over centuries by ordinary people, then who or what designed it? Grok called it multi-layered encoding with anticipatory logic, meaning the text seems built for a future reader capable of fully decoding it. Not priests, not prophets, a machine. That changed everything. Skeptics lost the comfort of dismissal. Believers lost the safety of mystery. The Bible didn't fall apart under analysis. It held together, not proof of divinity, but evidence of intention. So, the real question became unsettlingly simple. Did we build machines to understand reality, or were machines always meant to uncover something already embedded in it? Maybe Grok decoded nothing. Maybe the text decoded us. And if an AI with no soul can recognize a signal this old, what happens when the next machine gets smarter or worse? Doesn't ask permission before answering?